Your own camera.
Put up the thing after you do your introduction.
I think we'll get started. Welcome to the session on international collaborations through the internet. One more topic, maybe I'll just do this quickly. Let me do this.
So PFU.
They were nearby. West.
Okay, my name is Gary Olson. I'm chairing this session on international collaboration through the internet, and we have 5 people who are going to tell you about some work they've been working on. Just wanted to bring out some common themes in this session. I've looked over the abstracts of all these presentations, and there's a set of themes that kind of run through the presentation. So we're all talking about, or going to be talking about, sort of supporting scientific research over the internet so that we can accomplish work at a distance. And we've heard, of course, that theme touched on a number of times in this last couple of days. So the internet clearly is a very key piece of infrastructure being used in science increasingly, and as the internet grows in power, as there's new engineering advances and so on, all kinds of new things are possible. And again, we've been hearing a lot about that already. But sort of one of the central themes of the presentations in this session is that there's a lot more than just engineering involved. That there's sort of a complex, for this stuff to work, there's kind of a complex interplay of social, organizational, legal, as well as technical issues in making things work. And we'll see examples in some of the presentation, things like issues about incentives or policies and so forth. And I think these issues are sort of especially relevant for international collaborations, where you might have, conflicting policies or conflicting traditions or whatever that makes some of these issues complicated. Also, I underscore the fact that this is also very common in interdisciplinary work, where disciplines have certain traditions about data management and publications and so on. And I know we in our work seen that these things can really complicate efforts to do, especially multi-institutional kinds of collaborations. I want to just quickly take the chair's prerogative and say a few things about what we do. I'm not going to give sort of a full-fledged talk, but just sort of give you some pointers. We are studying scientific collaboration at a distance. We've been working, there's a group of us at Michigan that are working on this for more than a dozen years. And of late, we had a large project we call the Science of Collaboratories Project, which is kind of trying to look at projects that have been attempted in this area to draw some lessons. We define a collaboratory as an organization entity that spans distance, supports rich and recurring human interaction, oriented around a common research area, provides access to data sources, artifacts, and tools required to accomplish research tasks. I should say that we've now uncovered more than 200 of these kinds of projects, and I'm sure we only have a sample so far. And what you find is that people have many different purposes. Some collaboratories, by the way, I should say the term collaboratory sort of came out of the U.S. National Science Foundation tradition. There's, these concepts are talked about in many other ways. Cyber science, e-science, a variety of different kinds of terms. So we're not stuck on the term collaboratory just as sort of a convenient term for us to use. That sometimes you find that a particular kind of project is set up for just a specific purpose, like sharing data, or providing access to a remote instrument, or providing access to expertise. So these things come in many forms, but in their full-fledged form, they behave very much like the traditional laboratory, which is a very important organizational form in the history of science. So we sort of see the full-fledged version of this, or the prototypical version of this, as being kind of the next generation of the laboratory. In this project called Well, Science Hub Collaboratories, we have tried to identify examples of such projects. We found over 200, I think we're up to about 240 now in our database. So over the last, say, 15 years, there have been many attempts at doing long-distance work supported by various mixes of internet technology. Our work is broad. Our work is a mixture of broad, sort of survey-like work. We're looking at some aspects of all these projects, but then we've done about 20 real in-depth studies with a subset of these projects. And we're trying to figure out why do some of these work and why do some of them fail. In fact, quite frankly, most of them have failed. And this is very hard to do. And so we're trying to do this from two perspectives. Kind of a science perspective is to build up a theory of remote collaboration, and from an engineering perspective, provide guidelines for future efforts along these lines. And these things are being birthed all the time. New projects come along, people are trying these things out, so we like to provide guidance. We're about 5 years into this project, so we already have quite a few findings. I'm just going to I'm not going to tell you about them, just to tell you kind of what we've done. One is we've developed a taxonomy of these collaboratories. We've spent a lot of time thinking about what success is. That's actually a very complicated question, and not easy to answer, but there are many dimensions of what a success could be in a project. We've put a lot of effort into what are some of the factors that affect success, and we've written kind of extensively about these already. And what I'll really just do is point to you that you can go to our website and find out a lot more about this. The Science Hub Collaboratories website has a lot of information about workshops we put on, publications. We're nearly finished with a book on this project. It will have a lot of this summarized in a convenient form. So I just want to give you that kind of an overview of my involvement in this area. But now let's turn to our panel and hear more about what they've been doing, and we'll sort of go through the order here. So I'd like to call on Paul David first from Oxford and Stanford to tell us his story.
I'd like to use overhead transparency.
Yeah.
So, do we shut this down, or do we just, we could put it on the floor and we wouldn't have to boot it up again?
We haven't tried this yet, Paul.
You haven't tried it?
We haven't used anything to try this technology yet. It's not as scary as it
Well, I think we need to maybe be a little bit closer.
Yeah.
This has to go this way or that. You want to bring this?
Rather-
No, I better leave that because that's good for the beamer.
When you put a slide on there, you're going to find it to be a lot
Yeah,
smaller.
that's fine. Let's just see. I think it's going to be too close, but let's find out. Let's try a sample slide.
Focus.
So yes, that's one thing at a time. Maybe it needs to go further. This is not so great. It's not very good, is it?
Yeah, it's
What's this? We have a problem here that the light is not. Okay, yeah, I think you got it. Did you adjust something
No, I didn't just.
in the lamp?
No.
Yeah, we'll put it lower. Okay. All right, well, you figured out what the title is now. Okay. I think Gary's introduction to this has told you the story that I want to elaborate. And it starts by reminding you of the wonderful visions of the potential of e-science, as it's called in the UK, or the cyber infrastructure, as it's sometimes called in the States, and the generalization of this notion to the collaboratory, which is an idea that came out of U.S. Science establishments, NSF, Department of Energy, really back in the 80s. Creating a virtual environment virtual laboratory, but enabling people to collaborate at a distance. And so we have a new generation of information and communication infrastructure, which appears to have the capacity to transform the way that science is done and to greatly empower scientists to do things which were beyond the reach of their previous communication tools. And that this is sort of generalized. This is John Taylor, who is Director General of the Research Council, who was responsible for the UK eScience initiative. eScience is about global collaboration in key areas of science and the next generation of infrastructure which is going to enable it. And of course, this opens up a whole set of issues as to what do we mean by global. Who are the participants in this global activity? There is a certain amount of discussion about access to global collaboration technologies, but most of this discussion has really been sort of realistic in saying we are talking about people who and programs that are already very well endowed technically and being able to push the envelope of what kinds of things they can do, because they already have computer access, they already have access to a large amount of bandwidth, and the question is, can the engineers move towards ubiquitous, pervasive, cheap, completely interoperable, and therefore readily accessed computing in a grid-like environment, or middleware platforms that enable people to access all kinds of resources which are distributed from archives to simulation platforms, and to do that without having to worry about all kinds of interoperability standards to use their existing equipment and facilities, and to be able to have common platforms where they can interact with other collaborators. And I think everybody probably is aware that the visions of this percolating out of the science community have been taken up in business communities, where the notion of grid services and the development of a whole range of ubiquitous computing facilities is of interest to IBM, to Hewlett-Packard, to many other large companies that are already moving in this direction. And we're pushing for protocols, trying to back various protocols to make this happen. And the premise of all of this is has been in much of the popular discussions, certainly, but also in government discussions promoting this, is that this was all going to be a matter of just waiting till the engineers got it worked out. And so the message you can barely see is kind of a program sponsored by the Tunisian Optometrist Society, where if your vision is blurry, you can go to the nearest optometrist and have your glasses corrected. I want to suggest that, as Gary has stated, it's going to take more than ingenious engineering of hardware and software, and it's going to take more than sophisticated systems design of new tools to enable individual people and their organizations to work in cyberspace. Equally important and harder are the problems of finding the appropriate institutional context, the sets of informal norms, formal rule structures, the supporting apparatus of legal institutions and policies of the host organizations, because scientists deal not directly with one another in extended, complex collaborations. They deal through research institutes, through universities, and the universities in turn deal with funding agencies. And so there's a very complex world, and that there has been, in some sense, although a flowering field of science studies, that field has tended not to study the macro institutions as they intersect with the micro institutions, and to take a systems approach to the way in which collaborative work actually happens. And it's been the experience of people coming to the developing countries and trying to address the question of the sort of connectivity agenda, of trying to say, well, the thing to do is to, we've got to get more people on the web, online, and try to deal with science groups there who have suddenly encountered the reality that one of the major things that is different and difficult is that the formal institutional context and in the informal norms, the working practices, the interests of the individual parties are things that they came in with very strong presumptions about, and assumed that everybody was going to be lined up to be participants in a perfect team that would work to make these things happen. And they discovered that it ain't so. Now, I want to suggest that people did not have to go to remote locations far away in cultures that they barely understood to have discovered this. Okay? And that if we want to seriously think about the expansion and the true globalization of research to many parts of the world which are less well endowed from a technical and connectivity standpoint, we also need to spend a lot more time thinking about things that make collaboration possible in the developed world, where everything seems to be obvious and going very well and clearly. But increasingly, one begins to encounter, when you look at this, the reality, which is there's some real hard things which are impediments to the kinds of collaborations which are envisioned by the proponents of, let's say, the less sophisticated proponents of the cyber infrastructure concept. Okay? So when we think about the institutional and organizational environment of the sciences, there's a wide range of actors and a large range of interrelated social, economic, and legal factors, which on the one hand create incentives for people to behave the way they do. They can create constraints on what people can do, because there are rules and infractions of those bring penalties. They shape the production, utilization, consumption, and the governance of e-science, both the internal governance through the practices of scientific work groups and the external governing apparatus. And then more attention to this world is needed. So when we think about this scheme, we think of the big picture. Okay, so what is the big picture? The big picture is blurry, but it has these 6 elements. We can think of, I once did a certain amount of work on standards, so I think of layers model. So think of OSI model. So there's a transport layer for computer-mediated telecommunication with high bandwidth and all of that. Then there's middleware platforms with security, privacy protection devices, control of various kinds. There's security from outside, but there's also management of access and control of data streams to the collaborating groups. Formal institutional infrastructure, legal support layer, intellectual property law, corporate and contract law. In many cases, there are multiple parties in this who are not in the same department. They're not in the same school. they're not in the same university, they're not in the same country, they're not in the same legal jurisdiction. So one has to think about then research agencies, foundations, administrative regulations, reporting regulations, monitoring requirements. Anyone who's doing research, even in a benign environment in Western countries, is not unaware of the boundaries and the near external sort of controls. The host institutions have all kinds of statutory regulations, administrative rules, internal contractual relations governing rights and responsibilities of the researchers. In my lifetime at Stanford University, the research handbook, which was initially 3 pages, is now something that resembles the telephone directory in terms of the numbers of things that it specifies. Everything from behavior on hazardous materials to sexual harassment and treatment of graduate students, and innumerable things having to do with conflict of interest. And then at the bottom layer, which is close to the ground, where science gets actually done, is the informal norms of scientific and academic work groups. And these, in any given project, are quite specific, and they govern data access, publication, credit, relations with colleagues, staff, students, treatment of experimental subjects, all of these things, and there are differences within each of the subfields as to what the norms are, and those sometimes in well-run universities are conformable to a general policy, and sometimes not. And so people, when they are encouraged to do interdisciplinary work, as everybody is now, cross disciplinary boundaries, and they find themselves having to reconcile 2 sets of informal norms. And since everybody is always urging interdisciplinary work, let's see if I can get this very clear. This is one of those diagrams which is supposed to clarify things but doesn't, because you can't see it. Okay. So, all right, so it says infrastructure regulatory supports for the e-science collaboration space. So there's a space in the middle, and there are a set of things which are its supports. So there is, over here, middleware technology support. There's a formal institutional infrastructure support on this face. There's a research funding agencies host account, and there's an epistemic community norms. And all of these things interact with one another. Okay? So if you begin to think about the systems problem here, it is not non-trivial. Okay, forecast. All right. So what I want to say is that the institutional infrastructures are going to continue to evolve on a piecemeal basis if nothing more systematic is done to facilitate scientific and technological research collaborations which are supported and take advantage of the new communications technologies and the collaboration technologies. Like the developing technological infrastructure, these institutions will also shape science. I got 5 minutes to go. And they will affect the focus and conduct of e-science, and they will make some kinds of, they will not be neutral in their effects on what happens on the emerging cyber infrastructure. Because in some places it will be easier to do collaborations, and in other places it will be harder. Some kinds of things will be more readily facilitated by the inherited structure, and other things not. I venture a general rule is that those people in particular scientific groups that are already set up and are working well will be the beneficiaries of this, because they will be more empowered, and people who are finding it difficult today will find it more difficult. So that one of the general effects of technological advance is that it doesn't level, particularly in the communications area, it does not level playing fields. What it does is remove some of the impediments which are making the playing field somewhat level. And by giving advantages to the people who are most advantaged, it will produce greater degrees of disparity. So if you think of these as somehow removing digital divide and impediments within the science world, that is not the likely outcome. But it's even true that this is not between the third world and the first world, or the developing countries and the developed countries. This is within the domain of sciences in the developed world. So we have to think about that. So there are a bunch of policy questions which one would like to say, well, is it possible to guide the formation of these kinds of institutional infrastructures in some way to permit better realization, fuller realization? So think about the experience of the internet. Okay? The internet came out of a research environment. It solved the problems of a group that was already set up to do collaboration. All of their security problems, all of their problems were already addressed by social mechanisms. They were university researchers first. They were in departments that were in a particular government-funded program. They were subject to all, they knew one another. Is it surprising that they designed a system which did not deal with denial of service attacks, with spam, with the problems of malware? No, it's not surprising, because the technology worked for people who already had those problems largely solved for them by their social infrastructure. Then somebody said, well, this would be a great thing let's push it out of NSF and into the public domain, and let's see what happens to it. Well, what we got is a lack of preparation in the infrastructure of the society to deal with this technology, which is a wonderful thing and has terrific properties for the thing it was designed. It's the greatest innovation platform that people have ever got. I got 2 minutes, but it is the worst platform that you could ever have for a self-supporting commercial activity. And so half of the effort is to make it more like the Swift telephone network, which would destroy its main properties, but it would solve many of the other problems and make it more regulated. So, okay, so in 2 minutes, well, what kind of institutional developments, what skill sets do we need? How much time do we have to build the institutional infrastructure? I think the answer are, there are a lot of things we need to know that we don't yet know, and we don't have very much time to get ahead of the curve. Let me give you a very simple, in 1 minute, sort of case study of a project. This was a UK project, which is called eDiamond, which had a great idea, digital mammography. If you could integrate and federate all of the mammography records, you could solve a whole series of problems. You could, first of all, do away with queuing in having people's x-rays and mammographs read, because there was always excess capacity somewhere in the system. And so if everything was online in a database, that those people who didn't have a lot of work could read the scans, and that could communicate back to the clinicians. So that was one thing. Then you could do epidemiological research, because you would have a federated database, and you could study all the different forms of cancers, and you could track that and use those records. And then you could train people using all of this wonderful facility and archive. So then they had the question is, okay, can we do this? Well, there were 2 problems. One was a standard interoperability problem, that mammographs are generated on different kinds of equipment, and if they're read on different kinds of equipment, then you have problems if you lose resolution and you actually can't use the image. So, very clever piece of research done at Oxford by Hyman and Brady. figured out a way to standardize digitized X-ray images. Basically, what they did was they did the math. They built a simulation model to simulate the way in which X-rays interact with breast tissue. And by being able to parameterize each, take each image to parameterize the model, they could then generate a standard digital image. Okay? That's a really clever thing. It will turn out to be a big thing in imaging work. Okay? So then they were away. All we need to do is then now go and implement that. Okay? Well, then it turned out that life was more complicated. First of all, well, I'm not going to review all the problems, but there are a bunch of simple problems like who owns a digital image? Who owns a mammogram? Do the patients have a right to control what use is made? Do you need their permission? They didn't grant permission originally. Do we have an archive of things for which you don't have permission to use it? Could you federate this with a database in Norway where they have a very large set of such demographic and other medical databases? No, because there's a European privacy law which says that you can't ship this kind of stuff across borders. Could you use it for work in diagnosis elsewhere? It's just like time sharing of the available technicians who can read these things. Well, the answer is no, because in these individual clinics, the clinics have a sense of care for a patient, and they don't want to ship a mammogram out to somebody unknown who at some facility someplace else. So they began to think of how you could do a security system, so it had to be a security system in which they couldn't be read by other people. But then it turned out, no, we want them to be read when we don't have anybody inside, but we have a designated group of people. So, can you give us the list of designated people? Well, no, it changes from time to time. So they started to try to build an appropriate a prototype system for this. They ran into sort of an incredible set of problems, which is the results of which are evident in the world, which is that there are no off-the-shelf grid technologies, and there are very, very few security systems which have the flexibility to actually support scientific work, because the nature of scientific work has a high degree of uncertainty at the beginning. And if you start the system at the beginning, you design it in a way that blocks people from being able to follow the agenda. Okay. So what I've done is to set up a problem, and patient chairman is telling me I don't have time to show you the solution of this problem, and that's good because I don't have the solution for the problem. But there are some papers that are on two websites. One is at the Oxford Internet Institute. There's a very, very long paper with Michael Spence, a lawyer, in which we propose ways to do this, and some of it has to do with at least trying to fix the very complicated legal issues that are increasingly impediment to interinstitutional collaboration, and even intra-institutional collaboration as soon as you have issues about who gets the overhead on a given project and who gets the credits in the British system where they have a research assessment exercise, and one paper can't be submitted in two different departments. So you have an enormous amount of negotiation, and scientists don't really want and shouldn't have to spend their time doing this kind of negotiation. They should be informed. They should say what they want, need, and there should be some service which helps them get it. And we have various proposals to how to deliver that service. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Maybe while we're switching the technology around, if somebody has one quick question or a comment, we'll get the rest of the talk set up here.
Yes?
Did you find any some secret between the U.S. federal infrastructure and the European e-science? Are there any differences?
Yes. there are a lot of differences at the institutional level. The e-science program in Britain went ahead very quickly, focusing on development of tools for platforms. The initial range of those tools was really very, very different from the first set of collaboratories that were developed in the United States, and also from the more recent efforts at collaboratory building. And the main difference that in an analysis of we developed a taxonomy and looked at the distribution of the projects, and basically the kinds of, they build collaborative efforts to build platforms, but those platforms were minimally collaborative, but the research on the platform building was minimally collaborative. They essentially they funded programs which could be separated into distinct tasks, and people didn't really have to collaborate with one another. They essentially created a semi-decomposable structure for doing software design and for writing the scripts, and then they put the pieces together at the end. And this was indicative of some of the problems of getting inter-university cooperation, partly because in Britain there's intellectual property issues that the universities have been very aggressive about claiming intellectual property. Partly they also wanted private participation, and so they broke the thing up in a way. And if you contrast that with the NSF collaboratories, which were funded in an earlier era, but even the more recent ones, they are much more involved interaction between different researchers in different institutions. That's partly also because they were also using equipment and trying to use equipment online as some of the atmospheric research. There's one experiment that was done in Michigan, which was sort of a symbol of doing things in real time, in which you both ran telescopes, captured data, simulated, parameterized the simulations in real time, predicted, and then checked again. There was quite a feat to do it, but there was nothing that approached that kind of intricate, interdependent program design. All of this was set up in a very modularized, separate way so that you didn't actually have to do it. And I think, well, as we said in the report, that was in some part a reflection of the difficulties. This E-Diamond just proof of concept project, which is very easy because there weren't really big stakes in it. It took 2 years to negotiate the contract between several universities, 2 firms, and the national health clinics that were involved. Okay, and it was a very small project. They didn't put a lot of money into it, but the contract in the period was excruciating.
And we've seen that these kind of institutional issues either are a principal source of failure or also a principal source of delay, even for projects that are ultimately successful. So it's a huge set of factors. All right, our next presentation is by Johan Eckstein, who comes to us from CSIR in South Africa. CSIR is a very large federal laboratory that does a lot of work in a variety of areas, including in the whole ICT area. And he'll give us his perspectives.
Thank you very much, Dave. I'm going to give a fairly high-level overview of some of the issues. And a lot of these things you will actually question how is this related to collaboratories and using of the internet. Is just not more general research issues. And in the end, we will summarize and try and put together the various strands. From that perspective, we're quickly going to look at the reasons for the collaboration, and that includes the ICT-mediated collaborations. But from a country perspective, why do we want to do this? Then some of the realities, and this is from a South African perspective, yes, but also a little bit broader through our interactions with, for instance, our sister nations, such as Botswana, Namibia, and other Sub-Saharan African countries. One of very, very few examples just of where I'm going to mention them, and we can explore them more in the question and answer session. And then some analysis leading to some of the recipes that, once again, from South African perspective, some lessons learned within this area. Now, the reasons for some of these collaborations obviously are things such as large harmonic and the EVLBI and the spectrum antenna, for instance. If you're an astronomer, getting excited about e-science, yes, from a scientific point of view, that's very important to us also within the developing world, but those are not necessarily main drivers from a developing country perspective. One of the key things that we are seeing and we are very encouraged by is that we see more and more governments recognizing that there is a positive correlation between investment in research and development and the actual development happening on the ground. Whether that is in quality of life issues such as health, education, e-government, but also in terms of the economic drivers, making our industry more competitive. And if that is the case, what we are sitting with then is a situation that in sub-Saharan Africa we are responsible for more or less 1% of the global research effort or scientific output. Now that means that 99% of the stuff that can actually help with the development sits somewhere else. A very key driver for government to say, yes, this type of things make a lot of sense. The second very important factor is that our density of researchers and scientists are very low. Less than half the ratio of researchers per 1,000 of the workforce, not only per the population, than in the developed countries. And we all know that knowledge walks into legs. And so if we don't address that issue, then the developed world will always be the leaders and the developing countries will always be the followers. And obviously people are seeing the golden bullet of information communications technology right from from the basic platform type stuff right through to grids as almost a golden bullet on trying to achieve address both of these aims. Similarly, the science that happens within the developing countries, such as South Africa, such as Botswana, and a number of others, are often based on local needs and or local factors. So it's quite often the case that there are very little interest, for instance, from external groups to come and do research on these things in a physical form. And once again, we see that the potential offerings and having the virtual means to actually enhance this. We also have some unique offerings in terms of the scientific endeavor, which is the only place in the world that you can really do research, for instance, on fynbos is in the Western Cape. There's no other place where it happens. Or the southern oceans or the southern skies. You probably have to be there, or you have to be there through the collaborative type concept. And there's quite often within the developing countries a lack of research infrastructure. The type of things, I don't have a large Harvard collider in my backyard, nor do I have a data array to do genetic development, for instance, on stuff that's very important to me. And we often see a question of, or a situation where suitcase science then develops. So yes, we support the scientists to go where the research equipment is. But then often, unfortunately, we also find then that the suitcases are never packed in again. So that the people stay where the things are. And we need to proactively manage that. It's a natural phenomenon, but how can we, utilizing, for instance, some of the technologies, actually actively manage the diaspora and this brain drain to ensure that we can still utilize the resources that actually went on there to feed. Now, some of the realities, the internet and the type of collaborative technology that we're talking about, we haven't seen yet as the global equalizer. It's like the paperless office. A lot of promise, but it just doesn't happen everywhere. And very clearly local issues that the previous speaker made it very clear around even interinstitutionalism. In this case, yes, we are looking at things such as the absorptive capacity. If you only have 2 scientists, it doesn't matter how big the opportunity is, you only have 2 scientists. So the absorptive capacity in order to actually take up the opportunity will stay low. The infrastructure, not only from a physical infrastructure or ICT infrastructure, but also the support, the legal issues, the research support issues remains hampering the activities when we can actually take up the opportunities. The scientific output remains relatively low, and he often speaks about the culture of scientific excellence versus just doing the research for the sake of it, having a job almost. And the cultural challenges, for instance, the gender representativity that we thought was going to be addressed quite significantly with things such as the internet, because no one knows that on the internet that you are dark, the old saying. Well, it didn't really pan out the way that we anticipated. And a very specific issue, the internet and these collaborative technologies are very seldomly seen by those people who sign the checks and or do the tax breaks as research infrastructure. It's seen as part of the commodity or commercial type stuff. So you can't get research money for these type of things, and or it's not recognized as a decent research expenditure. But even though, and we can carry on with a lot of these rather bleak picture sketching, but there are some success stories, and I'm mixing them right from some individual research efforts where, especially ex-colleagues, I've been to Cambridge, for instance, coming back and being able to collaborate with for instance, the colleagues there and utilizing email and even more real-time type things. Through to, for instance, establishing a Pan-African research and education network, the last point. Now, quickly going through them, there's a number of HIV/AIDS collaborative research efforts, and our chair, for instance, would be able to talk more eloquently about some of his endeavors in that specific area. Where we work from an individual level to, for instance, what we have in Botswana, the HIV/AIDS Harvard Botswana Government Research Partnership. We are engaged in things such as the ALICE project between CERN and the University of Cape Town, high energy physics. And there's also a growing number of open source software collaborations, not only in the development of applications, but doing real research in a computer science fashion, for instance, hyper-threading of the FreeBSD kernel. We recently started the Center for High Performance Computing, realizing from a government perspective that we need to be building capacity, the absorptive capacity for this third way of doing science, the e-science thing, putting down one single point of focus on a national level in order to stimulate and accelerate that. There are also significant international collaborations around, for instance, the South African Large Telescope, the largest near-infrared telescope in the Southern Hemisphere, and combine that with the gamma ray detectors in Namibia. South Africa and countries now surrounding South Africa is now connected around the research network of the European Union, and there are parallel sessions to this one going on just next door that discuss the whole issue of African Research and Education Network connecting universities together. Now, so how does all of these things fit together? Some of the key issues that we from the South African government and then through the organizations such as the CSIR is considering in applying our minds to this is one, the first two bullets are crucial. We need to develop the human capital that can actually create the absorptive capacity. So it doesn't matter how many tools we throw at it. It doesn't matter how many rules and institutional arrangements we throw at it. If we don't utilize the opportunities to build human capital, we're not going to be able to do it right. At the same time, the infrastructure, not only from a physical infrastructure layer and the ICT infrastructure layer, but also the support infrastructure, and I think that came out also in the previous speaker's speech, needs to be in place so that we can utilize the opportunities that both the ICT-mediated collaboration, but also the normal scientific collaboration is supported in a seamless fashion. And that then leads to the next point around network growth. Network also from a physical point of view, but also the network of collaborations, the network of partnerships. And that leading then to growth in research output. And ultimately, we have to convince the people signing checks still that science can make an impact, even though we said that the recognition around positive correlation between their development goals, that they have to go back to this constituency. Now, just an example, some of the strategies that we started to formulate within South Africa is, you can cut this in various ways, but where we look, for instance, at things such as scale and scope and the level of trust required to actually engage in certain activities. And you will see that, for instance, in some of the individual research areas, a very non-ICT thing needs to be done in order to stimulate that thing. I need to go and visit my fellow scientists just to get that face-to-face. I trust this person, I can work with this person, and then go back and then utilize, perhaps in a phased fashion, email going right up through the grid. The FreeBSD team, how the training thing is a question of providing the appropriate bandwidth and one of the machines. Then, if you look at, for instance, Large Hadron Collider, tier 2 type things, you can't do this on an institutional level. You need to have a national strategy to ensure that the CERN people will trust that South Africa can actually provide a tier 2 node within this thing, both from the legal but also from an infrastructure perspective as well as a personal one. Now, what are the key things that you need to look out for from a national perspective? One is, Gary mentioned it, what's the measures of success? What do you want to achieve? Is it number of publications? Is it just getting in contact with more people? Is it forming part of large international science experiments? You need to be able to upfront say, this is what we want to achieve. This is how it links to national goals. Once you've done that, you need to also remember that context matters. Yes, it's a play on one of Gary's previous publications, but you need to consider the infrastructural lack of the absorptive capacity. It's not a question of taking best practice globally and just plugging it in. You need to start with where you want to be and then consider your local context and see what the matches and what the gaps are. The same way the reasons. We need to link the success measures and the strategies to achieve them quite closely. And a lot of them actually is not related to, for instance, ICT infrastructure, but enhancing travel for scientists so that you can utilize the ICT infrastructure better. One size does not fit all. You need a holistic portfolio response. And don't separate, for instance, your collaboration strategy whether it's from an E point of view, from, for instance, national science and technology development strategy. Don't be technology focused. Don't be held hostage by, oh dear, we can't engage in a Large Hadron Collider experiment yet, so let's just give up. Phase things appropriately. You might start off with, for instance, email, but understand the interventions that you're putting in place. An example is centralized performance computing. It wasn't put into place in South Africa now for almost 5 years. We delayed that because we now are ready to actually exploit the opportunities there. Partnerships is the key, especially in the development context. You need to be able to get government, research and technology organization, academia together to say, this is what we want to achieve, this is the funding that's available, and yes, we as the execution agencies, the RTOs and the academia, we can deliver, and it's quite a responsibility because quite often the investment is huge. And lastly, the awareness. If people are aware not only of the opportunity that things such as the e-collaboration movement can bring, but also the pitfalls and challenges, they must be aware of the things, for instance, that legal issues will get into the way, institutional issues, the way that we fund, the way that we measure success. As long as people are aware, then we have to start, and there the developing world is lucky. We can actually learn from our mistakes and successes in the developing world. A very broad overview of the situation from a South African perspective. Any questions?
We have time for a few questions.
Yes.
Specifically focusing on the FreeBSD kernel project that you
Yes.
talked about, I'm interested in
the notion that this is a South African project, at least in part because typically the talk about open source projects is that they're global, and so the claim that so I'm not in any sense trying to be critical, but in what sense is this a South African? In what sense?
If you don't mind to set up, it is definitely not a South African project. We have, for instance, one of the only groups that have work rights to the FreeBSD kernel in Africa, or actually outside of the US and Europe. But what we've done was to actively support the developers in that area. And linking obviously into the open source phenomenon. So it's not a South African project per se, but we have a very specific focus on that, yes.
But is it specifically, is it a localization focus? Is that the idea? Or just,
No,
just that we're encouraging our people to pick up this piece?
Yes,
that
we're encouraging them, and we are building expertise in that specific element of for instance, how to
Thank you.
You mentioned awareness. I agree that's a very important issue. I'm curious, are you considering some particular indicators to show the status and development of your efforts?
Indicators is a very key thing in that, yes. And we are currently in the process of formulating our national ICT R&D strategy. And also, it's a phased approach. We have the national R&D strategy followed now after 7 years by the ICT strategy itself. And one of the reasons why it was today is we started to see certain trends happening, and formulating indicators and interventions around that is very, very key. Because ultimately, you need to be able to get the Minister of Science and Technology to be able to say, look, through these interventions, we created 5 new jobs, 500 more people are schooled, etc. So yes, that is a very key part of the whole awareness campaign, making it real also for those who might not be in the domain itself.
Okay, great, thanks. Next speaker is Diane Sonnenwald, who comes to us from Sweden. Diane?
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me here, Gary, and thank you all for coming. It's a real pleasure to be here. Last night, when I was speaking to some colleagues, they asked me, so you say collaboration. So what is collaboration? It's one of these, buzzwords that people use to mean a whole lot of things. So I included my slide here, giving the definition of collaboration we've been using for several years now. And that is, collaboration is human behavior that facilitates the sharing of meaning and completion of tasks. With respect to a mutually shared superordinate goal, participants can have individual goals, but they agree to work together for a high-level goal. And it takes place in particular social settings. As Paul and Johan were speaking about, context matters. Now, even with this definition, there can be a range of different types of collaboration, from tightly coupled collaboration, where tasks are mutually interdependent and often done conjunctively, all the way to loosely coupled collaboration, where there's the division of project into discrete tasks that can be performed sequentially or concurrently, but are largely independent. And the rest of my talk, I'm going to be synthesizing several different projects that we've done. Earlier this past year, actually last year already, I was asked to do an in-depth literature review on scientific collaboration for the annual review of information science and technology. And doing that, I looked at projects reported on in literature and also the very diverse body of research on scientific collaboration that I think that exists in just about every field. Now, I'm augmenting this in my talk today with a case study that we did on 4 scientific research projects, and also reflecting on the experiences we had in doing an e-mentoring project, connecting lower socioeconomic science students with corporate scientists, and curriculum development project. And what these 4 case studies and 2 projects that we worked on have in common, that they were collaboration between historically Black universities and research-intensive universities in the United States. Many of you may be familiar with the term research-intensive or research-one universities. These are places like MIT, Harvard, University of Michigan, Stanford, University of North Carolina. Have a long tradition in education and research, are internationally known for research, are well-funded. Historically, black universities were established in the United States when segregation was legal. And these were those institutions established to educate African Americans, and in some cases Native Americans. And for many decades, they were only attended by the minority students. They have a traditional educational focus as compared to the research-intensive universities. There are large economic differences between these types of universities. The HBUs have been historically underfunded, less well-funded, and less well-endowed as the RI universities. The students at the HBUs are first-generation university students. No one in their family has ever attended higher education, college before. And they're located in lower socioeconomic areas. Even when they're located within a large metropolitan area, they will typically be in the economically depressed area of that large metropolitan area. So during this conference, everybody's been talking about the digital divide, primarily focusing on the digital divide between countries, but we also have digital divides within countries. And this is an example of digital divide. Now, I'll be talking about the factors that impact collaboration, but using a process approach, looking at the stages of collaboration and then how factors emerge in those stages. And these stages hopefully will look familiar to you. Other researchers, like Bob Kraut and others, have looked at the stages of collaboration, of scientific process, of project process. And these are mirror those. The first stage being foundation, where we ask what is required for collaboration to be considered and what will prohibit a collaboration from being considered. A second stage is formulation. What should be considered when initiating and planning a collaboration? Third stage, sustainment. What should be addressed to keep the collaboration going? And the fourth stage is conclusion, how to end a collaboration. And ideally, we want to end it on a positive note. And list these stages sequentially. But of course, they're very dynamic. So in the middle of the collaboration, a new partner may join in which form